Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. I'm Huck. Today we are doing my July wrap-up. July felt like it was a million years long in 1 month. So the things that I finished at the beginning of the month, I am going to do my best to remember them, but it was just a long month. But I finished 8 books this month. I did have a few DNFs, but I have already made progress on my TBR Clear Out Project bonus round. This name is getting too long. I'm not gonna explain it because I've already explained it so many times. I have videos about it if you're interested. The book from this TBR Clear Out Project that I got to this month was Song of Blood and Stone by L. Penelope. This is also the first book that I finished this month, so we can just jump right in to talking about it. So this is the first book in a fantasy series. My understanding is that they are kind of a companion series, so each book is sort of a standalone, but they all take place in the same world. In this world, it's set in this country that has been at war off and on for years, and there is a magical veil separating this country from another magical country. The people who have magic are called Earth Singers, but they have this kind of evil overlord who saps their magic, and that is why there has been this war between the two countries and why there is this magical veil to kind of keep these two people apart. We have two real main character perspectives. One is Jasminda, that when we meet her, she's kind of in dire straits. Her home is about to be taken away from her because of some unpaid taxes that she didn't know about. She has a suspicious offer from an estranged relative that seems a little too like perfect timing to line up with this issue that's come up in her life. She also lives, she lives outside of town, but she is not well accepted into town because her family, her father was actually from the other side of the magical barrier, and he had magic and passed that magic on to her, and her mother was from like this country that she is currently living in, which does not have magic. Both of her parents and her brothers have passed away at the time when this book starts, so she is on her own trying to keep a hold of her family home, their farmhouse, as kind of the last piece of that life. But she doesn't really have any like friends. She's not accepted in town because of her magic and her ancestry through her father's side and that connection to this other country that they have been having a war with for many years. Our other main character, I believe her name is Ella. She lives in like a big port city. She is actually from another country and she is trying to get citizenship in this country. Her husband works for the army, and so he is often away from home, and she's working at the beginning as like a hairstylist when she suddenly gets a mysterious and urgent message from her estranged older sister who she hasn't talked to in like 10 years, but this like urgent message being like, you have to come now, I need your help. And so she goes to her sister. I don't want to spoil like what's going on there, but essentially her sister does need her help with something. At the beginning of the book, I found Ella incredibly frustrating because it was a situation where it's like what her sister needed her to do was not wildly difficult, and yet she immediately failed, and not in a way that would like made sense, in a way that just had me being like, you had one job and it wasn't even a hard job and you like immediately could not do it, and it just was so frustrating to me, and I was just like, you are so stupid, I cannot stand this. So I found her character immediately annoying. I think that she does get better over the course of the book, becomes more competent, I guess, but it was one of those times where the level of incompetence felt unrealistic to a point where it felt like she only was incapable of completing that task so that she would have a plot to do to like fix her mistake. Overall, I did enjoy this. I was kind of surprised that it is described or marketed as romantasy. It didn't really feel like romantasy to me, especially like there is a romance in it. it did not feel as romance-centric as I would usually expect from a romantasy. It was like definitely present, but it didn't feel like the main focus of the story for the majority of the book, which might be why this worked for me. Sometimes romantasy like just doesn't really land for me, and since this felt like it was actually more focused on the world and the plot, it may have worked better. The romance felt more like a subplot, and that's kind of my speed for like romance in a fantasy book. At the end of the book, I did kind of go like, well, maybe I can see how this would be considered a romantasy, because there were a few things about the plot that I didn't feel like were necessarily explained or wrapped up, or there were like a couple of threads that felt like they were maybe dropped, but the romance plotline definitely like was wrapped up. And so I was like, okay, maybe I see in that way that it's a romantasy, in that the effort to kind of come to a conclusion and really wrap things up was focused on the romance and the relationship, as opposed to some of the plot threads that I was like, but what about this? But I thought that it was an interesting world. I think the magic was interesting, and yeah, I liked this world. I might read more books in this series. It's not necessarily one that I'm like running to read the next book, but I certainly might read on in the series in the future. Next, I read Dreams of Chaos by Shauna Lawless. This is her most recent release. It is a novella in the Gale Song world, and this is giving backstory to the character Mirka. We are following him from a young child through like his teen years, and really fleshing out his character. He's a character that, you know, shows up in the main series, and I love him. He's a very likable character, but I think we only get maybe a couple POV chapters in the last book, but for the most part, like, he's very likable, but we don't necessarily get to like dig into his character that much, and so this is really providing some of that backstory. And I would say that of the novellas, Dreams of Sorrow, still my favorite, but this was a solid installment. I really liked getting that backstory for this character. Merlin's moving around in his dog bed a lot, so if you hear noises and a big sigh, that's him. But as a character, he is a very interesting character. I think he's very bold. He, in a lot of ways, is a very like unusual person. He doesn't just do things the way that everyone else has because that's how they've always done it. He really thinks about like what is the right thing to do, what is the best thing to do. One of the things that I really liked the most about it also is just how we get to see a glimmer of the man he will become in the child. It's actually something that I think is really fascinating. I love to talk to people about. I love asking people, like, what is a story about you from when you were a child, probably before you were 12 or 13, that shows some kind of characteristic, some kind of approach or perspective that either stayed consistent into your adulthood or was an obvious evolution into something about you as an adult. I love to be able to see that connection of things that just organically we do as children, that then you can see, like, you can connect the dots and go like, this is the same person. I see how like this child evolved into this adult. And I love being able to like see that through line, that connection, that evolution in a person. So that is something that I love to talk to people about and love to hear their stories. And so this novella, I think, really fed into the part of me that loves that kind of thing. Next, I read The FOW Year by Margaret Owen. This is the kind of bridge novella between books 2 and 3 in the Little Thieves trilogy. And this is the one that she published or like posted to AO3. And I've heard people describe it as like 10 short stories, but really it's more like 10 chapters in a novella. And this is about kind of what happens to these characters between the end of the second book and the beginning of the third book, and is really focused on kind of on their like emotional and mental state based on something that happens at the end of the second book. And honestly, the FOW Year is a real downer. I was reading this and texting a friend of mine who's read the series being like, I am so sad. All of my favorite characters are so sad and they are so just angry and upset, and I feel bad for them, and they're all gonna develop complexes, and I am unhappy. So I was like, it is good, but I was having a terrible time because I just was like, but I just want them to be happy. But yeah, so it was very good, but definitely a downer. Next, I read The Night and the Moth by Rachel Gillig. This has been truly everywhere recently. Everyone is talking about this book, I feel like. In this, our main character is what is called a diviner. There are 6 girls who have grown up in this spooky cathedral who have the ability to divine the future. Their service is supposed to be 10 years. They're coming to the end of their 10 years when the new king and some of his knights show up for their future to be divined. And right after they show up, some of the girls start going missing. And so our main character has to, or decides to, set out to find her friends, and she enlists the help of this boy king and his knights. And then of course, this is a romantasy, so she also has a romance with one of those knights. And honestly, this did not hit for me in the way that it has for other people. This one just didn't really land. And I think, I don't know if I can pinpoint exactly why. Like, honestly, I don't read a lot of romantasy, and so it might just be that like romantasy isn't really my thing. This had a lot of similar like tropes, and there is a certain style of writing that I associate with romantasy that this had, although maybe not as extremely as some other romantasy books out there, but it also still had one of my pet peeves that I think is quite prevalent in romantasy, which is slightly misusing words. It is thesaurus writing, using words in a way that feels like you don't really know what that word means or how it's meant to be used in context, or using them in a way that I'm like, I guess you could technically use it that way, but nope, nobody would use it that way, and it's weird and confusing and off-putting that that's the word you picked for this context when there's a much better word you could have used. I started a little running list in the back of the book of like words that were misused, and so at a certain point I just had to put it down because I was not enjoying it, and that kind of thing really just pulls me out of the book. It is not even me being like snooty about it or something. Like it pulls me out of the flow of the story because it makes me kind of stop and reread things because I'm like, what are you saying? Anyway, that was frustrating me, so I put this down for a couple weeks maybe, picked it back up as an audiobook, and it was better as an audiobook because I was less aware of them misusing words, but it still just wasn't a huge hit for me. There are also things about like the relationship dynamic just wasn't really working for me. I didn't feel a lot of chemistry between the characters. It also did a thing that I find annoying in really any book, but I find is more common in romantasy, which is like she meets the guy, the knight that she's gonna have a romance with. He is immediately rude and antagonistic to her for no reason, and then also her response to that is to be like sassy and antagonistic back and then become obsessed with him. And I don't understand why, because it seems so unrealistic to me that I'm like, one, why is he just rude and antagonistic right off the bat? Who does that? Especially like when they're at work, which he is. Like, he's doing his job. He's being a knight protecting the king. But also on her end, I'm like, I feel like a normal person, if you encountered somebody like that, you would just be like, all right, like, weird, you're rude, I'm not gonna talk to you. Like, it doesn't create this like crazy sexual tension, now I'm obsessed with you. Like, what? Like, who would respond like that? You would just go like, all right, weirdo, like, stop being weird and rude, like, I'm leaving, you know? Anyways, it's annoying to me and it just seems so unrealistic and stupid. But, you know, it's a trope that works for some people. This one just like didn't really land for me. I wasn't really getting the vibes. Like, I wasn't really getting the like gothic vibes. I wasn't getting the night vibes. It just didn't do much. It was fine. I didn't hate it, but it also was like just I think I gave it 3 stars. Next, I read Dragon Fruit by Makia Lucier. This is the last of her fantasy books that I have not read, so I finally finished that out. She has one more like historical fiction, but I am not sure if I'm going to read that. But I have now read all of her fantasy books, which is very fun. I've been really just enjoying all of her books this year. I buddy read this with my friend Kara from Wild Book Garden, and you know, let me explain what this is about. So this is set in a fantasy world that is inspired by Pacific Island culture. It takes place primarily on an island. On this island, it is a matriarchal society. Years ago, the princess, who was meant to become queen next, was poisoned, and the only way to save her could be with a wish from a dragon egg. There is a legend that dragon eggs can grant you some kind of wish. However, there may also be a curse associated with it. They do manage to find an egg, but before they can use it to save the princess, it is stolen by one of her advisors and is used to save his daughter, who was also poisoned at the same time. So he runs away with his daughter and the dragon egg to save her. And that girl is who is our main character in this book. She has been living on her own away from the island for years now, studying dragons because she feels a connection or affinity with them. When circumstances kind of bring her back to the island with a potential opportunity to find a dragon egg and maybe redeem herself and save the princess. She reconnects with an old friend who is the prince and the son of the princess who needs to be saved, and they set out on this journey to try and find a dragon egg. Overall, I thought this was fun. It was probably my least favorite of Makia Lucier's books, but I generally just find her books very readable and enjoyable, so like still pretty solid. I'll say that there is a romance in this, and I had like no feelings about the romance. It's like, you know, it's gonna happen, it's fine. I'm not very emotionally invested in it one way or another. I did find the individual characters pretty likable. There were a couple places where like I had some questions and I felt like it could have maybe explained things a little bit better. I think that my main issue with this was really that I think there were a lot of moments where we could have encountered some interesting kind of moral or ethical questions, especially around dragon eggs, because to get the dragon eggs, you may have to kill the dragon. There is this potential curse associated with it. But if you don't take the risk, if you don't, you know, kill these dragons, then they're not able to save Sam's mother and the princess. And so I think it could have posed some interesting like moral or ethical questions or conflicts that either the characters could have grappled with or could have made the readers grapple with as they are watching these characters make choices. But again and again, the author would create scenarios that provided loopholes or workarounds or just ways for them to kind of skate by these moral questions and not have the main characters have to make hard choices or really engage with that. That was probably my main complaint about this. So I had a good time in that. I like her writing. I think her worlds are fun. Her characters are likable. But I also had some issues with this one, so it didn't quite land for me. I think I gave it was either like a 3 to 3.5 star for me. Next, I read The 13th House by Sharon Shin, book 2 in the 12 Houses series. So I started the series way back at the beginning of the year, and then I decided to like go read the Elemental Blessing series first. Now I'm coming back around to the 12 Houses, and I ended up actually enjoying this book more than I was expecting to, because the way it started out, I was like, oh no, I don't think I'm gonna like this. But I ended up having a really good time and really reminded me like what I enjoy about Sharon Shin's books. So in this one, we're following Kira's perspective. It starts out with her and Justin and Donald and Kamen, so most of the group, saving this man named Ramar, who is meant to be regent to the princess, but he has been kidnapped, and so they have to go save him, and that is how Kira first meets Ramar, and their dynamic and relationship becomes very central to the story. From there, Kira goes home. We get to meet her family, her father and her sister. Her sister is very much a homebody. She does not leave like their estate because she feels a strong connection to the land. However, she does need to make connections with other nobility, and so they convince Kira to disguise herself as her sister and go on this like tour as a companion to the princess, and so she's representing her home but being her sister, who is also the person who is also on this tour, along with like, you know, we get to see Seneth and Taze and Justin and Cam, like the whole crew is there, but also Ramar, and Kira is obsessed with him. And he's into her too, and it's a whole thing. This is the thing that I was just like, oh no, I don't think I'm gonna like this, because Ramar, like there are so many things about this whole dynamic. First and foremost, Ramar is married, so like what is she doing? I'm out. Don't care about this romance. But also, I just don't get it, because Kira is constantly like obsessed with him and is like, he's so irresistible, and I'm just like, girl, he is very resistible. He is annoying and so stupid and like incredibly frustrating and arrogant and like so I was like, if this whole book is just gonna be about the two of them, I am out. Like, I do not care. And it is very central to the book. However, there are also like, there are a lot of other characters surrounding it, because you have kind of the main crew from the first book who are all just such likable characters. We get an update on like what's been going on with like Seneth and Taze and Kamen and Justin and like all of these characters who I love. I think there were some really good character relationship moments, like not romantic, but like platonic relationship moments between those characters in this kind of main group. Also in this one, we are introduced to Princess Amelie, who I am obsessed with. I love her. She's so good. There are so many weird people that they encounter, or like weird people, powerful people, creepy people, like people who are trying to either intimidate or manipulate or whatever her as this like young princess, and she just like, the whole time I was like, yes, give them nothing. She's just given them no emotion, no foothold on her as a person, and it's amazing, and I love her. And I think that she is going to come back in book 4 or something, and I cannot wait. Anyways, she was the highlight of this. I was annotating, and like there's one interaction that I was annotating that was just like, everything was just like underlining everything she said, notes everywhere, just this one interaction I was obsessed with. Anyways, I had a very fun time in that. I ended up really enjoying this a lot more than I thought I was going to, and I am so glad, and I'm very excited to continue on in this series now, and I gave this one 4 stars. Next, I read The Morrigan by Kim Curran. This is a recent release that just came out this year. It is a retelling of Irish mythology of the Morrigan, who is this like goddess of war and death and destruction, and it's telling her story. So it is one of those mythology retellings where it takes a female character from mythology that is often like vilified in some way and tells her side of the story. However, it really allows her to fully be a goddess of death or war. She is not trying to be like, oh, I've been misinterpreted and people don't understand me. She's like, yes, I want to fight a war because I want to kill people and rip their guts out. Like, that is her vibe. And she does have things, you know, that are sympathetic about her. And I think that this has a very clear, like, feminist approach to it about people not accepting her, like her peers not accepting her because she is not like soft and sweet. She is fierce and strong, and how they do not allow her to have any power. They discount her abilities, how they just undervalue her and use her. And so there are moments where she is sympathetic, but I don't think the point of this is to prove that she's actually a nicer person than she was. It just is to more fully realize her character. I did feel like sometimes the kind of feminist themes of it were a little heavy-handed, and I tend to prefer when themes are a little more subtle and a little more like you have to think. You know, I want it to be a thinker, you know, not one that's just like, here's the point. So that's a personal preference. I think also a personal preference is like the amount of closeness or distance you have from the character. I find that in these types of retellings where they are telling the story of like a woman from myth or legend or history, and they're trying to kind of flesh out her character, there are generally 2 approaches. One is where they maintain a very like mythological style, and that maintains a degree of distance from the character. So they are giving you more information about this character's life and events, but you're maintaining this distance, and it has that tone of a myth or a fairy tale that is more sort of describing what's going on as opposed to like getting really close to them. The other type are the type where they are doing this retelling with the intention of giving you greater intimacy with the character. So they're trying to really like pull you into that character's experience and emotional life. And so you lose that kind of like fairy tale or mythological tone to the story in service of having greater intimacy with the character. My personal preference is the type where you get greater intimacy with the character, that the purpose of retelling this story is to get that closeness. That's more like what Signe Pike does in The Lost Queen. But this one I think is more so the type where it really maintains that mythological distance. So to me, it's more similar to The Witch's Heart by Genevieve Gornichek in like tone. So if you like that, if you liked The Witch's Heart and you like that kind of mythological distance, then you might like this. So this one I gave 3.5 stars. I think that it was interesting. I think that the author accomplished what she was trying to accomplish. It's just that it was not my personal taste in how these types of retellings are done. And finally, the last book that I finished in July was Penriks Demon by Lois McMaster-Bujold, which was a reread for me. I really was in the mood to listen to something that was like familiar and kind of cozy and just something that I knew I would have fun with. And I found out that there is a new book in this series. Lois McMaster Bujold just kind of drops these books with no forewarning. You just find out like, oh, there's a new book now. So a new book came out at the beginning of July, which I only found out about because I happened to be like looking on Goodreads at this series. And I decided that I didn't want to just read that book immediately. I wanted to reread the whole series, but this time I'm doing a chronological reread. So the first time I read this series, which I started reading this series in 2018, so it's been a while that I've been working on this series, but I read them just in publication order, and they were published in like kind of out of order in some cases. So this time I am doing a chronological reread to follow the internal chronology for this series. So I started with the first book, Penriks Demon, and I only got through one, but I'm going to be continuing on in the series next month. Also, did not explain what this is about. This is set in Lois McMaster Bujold's fantasy world, that is the world of the 5 gods. And so in this world, there are 5 gods. People are aligned with each god. But the way that you get magic is through gods and demons. Being possessed by a demon gives you powers, but is also extremely dangerous because they can ascend and take over and become very dangerous. Our main character, Penrik, is like the youngest son of a minor lord. He is on his way to be married to this girl that he's met one time. He stops on the road because he sees an old lady who is in distress, and she dies and her demon jumps to him. And so now he suddenly has a demon living in his body, and so he has to like go to the temple and they have to figure out what to do with him because he's not supposed to have a demon, and they're like, I don't know if you can handle this and all of this. But while they're trying to figure out what to do with him, he befriends his demon. Most people don't, but he's like, you know what, we're gonna be living together, so we should get to know each other. And it was so fun to revisit this first book and really see all of the ways in which he extends kindness to his demon, and is so just like thoughtful and kind to her so immediately in a way that nobody ever is. And it is to demons, at least. And it is partially because like that's just the type of person he is. Like that's just how he interacts with people, but also he doesn't know to be afraid of the demon. He doesn't know to treat it as dangerous. And so he develops this very unique relationship with his demon, Desdemona, as he names her, that is just so sweet. And the two of them are just so great together, and it's such a fun series, and it was really great to like come back to the beginning. Anyways, so gave this one 4 stars, and I'm really looking forward to continuing on with the series. But those are all of the books that I read in July. I would love to know, how was your July reading, and also have you read any of these? But thank you all for watching, and until next time, bye!